It's June 13th, 1996, in Idaho Falls.
Right.
18-year-old Angie Dodge is found raped and murdered in her apartment. And the violence of the crime scene is staggering. The cause of death is a severe laceration to her throat.
It's horrific.
It really is. But during the autopsy and the crime scene processing, investigators find something that should, in theory, crack the case wide open. They recover the killer's DNA.
Specifically, they find semen and hair, right?
Yes, exactly. They extract this pristine biological signature, run it through the FBI's combined DNA index system, CODIS, and they get nothing. Just no match at all.
Which is so frustrating because they possessed the ultimate objective truth of who was in that room, but without a corresponding profile in the database, that biological signature is just a string of meaningless letters.
Yeah, so the trail immediately goes cold.
And that frustration allows investigative bias to creep in, because months later, the Idaho Falls police shift their focus entirely away from the forensic evidence, and they zero in on a 20-year-old neighbor named Christopher Tapp.
I look at the records from our sources, and the sheer volume of pressure put on this kid is just staggering. Over the course of several weeks, Tapp is subjected to intense, relentless questioning.
Yeah, the hours are insane.
Some sources cite over 30 hours of recorded interrogation. Others point to a staggering 100 hours of total police contact. I mean, this isn't an interview, it's a psychological siege. The police use threats of execution. They offer these completely false promises of immunity. And crucially, they actively feed Tapp-specific, non-public facts about the crime scene. They're essentially writing a script for him. And ultimately, Tapp breaks. He confesses to the murder.
And the defining element here is the DNA. That objective biological signature collected from the victim did not match Christopher Tapp. He was completely, unequivocally excluded as the source of the semen and the hair.
None of it matched.
Right. Yet, the momentum of the confession superseded the physical reality of the crime scene.
I have to push back on this because it just defies all basic human logic. We look at this from the outside and think, well, I would never, under any circumstances, confess to a horrific murder I didn't commit.
I think anyone listening feels exactly the same way.
Right. Why does someone sit in a room and admit to a crime when they know they're innocent?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it feels entirely counterintuitive until you examine the physiological and psychological mechanisms at play.
Okay, tell me about that.
So the academic study from the Fort Hays State University Criminal Justice Program in our stack isolates exactly how these false confessions are manufactured. It comes down to a concept called guilt presumptive interrogation.
Guilt presumptive.
Yeah. The detectives don't enter that room to find the truth. They enter already absolutely convinced of the suspect's guilt. They develop severe tunnel vision. When law enforcement isolates a suspect, especially a young one, for tens or hundreds of hours, they weaponize exhaustion.
Oh, wow.
Sleep deprivation and prolonged stress severely impair the prefrontal cortex, which governs logical decision-making and understanding long-term consequences.
So they basically break down the suspect's reality until the immediate, desperate need to escape the interrogation room just overrides the abstract fear of going to prison.
Exactly. The suspect starts thinking, if I just say what they want, I can go to sleep and we'll sort out the truth tomorrow.
That is terrifying.
It is. And the FHSU research highlights a terrifying downstream effect in the courtroom, too. When a jury is presented with a confession, they assign it overwhelming, almost insurmountable weight.
Even over DNA.
Yes. The human brain is wired to believe that self-incrimination is the ultimate indicator of guilt. Even when defense attorneys point to the stark reality that the forensic science completely contradicts the confession, juries routinely discount the science in favor of the emotional impact of a suspect saying, I did it.
It's like doing a complex jigsaw puzzle where the piece clearly does not fit the hole, the shape is wrong, the colors clash, but instead of looking for the right piece, the system just takes a hammer and smashes it into the board anyway.
That's a great way to put it. You just destroy the picture.
Exactly. So in 1998, relying on a confession riddled with inconsistencies, and a key witness who later admitted police pressured her to lie, Christopher Tapp is convicted. He is sentenced to 30 years to life in prison.
Unbelievable.
He sits in a cell year after year, while the actual killer's DNA just sits in an evidence locker. But the story doesn't end there, because while Tapp is trapped in time, DNA technology is accelerating at a breakneck pace.
Oh, big time.
By 2014, investigators decide to utilize a new technique on that old DNA, hoping the science has caught up to the crime. Instead, they trigger a massive privacy scandal and accuse yet another innocent man.
Yeah, this brings us to a pivotal, often misunderstood chapter in forensic history. In 2014, investigators attempted a technique called familial searching.
Right, familial searching.
They isolated the Y chromosome data from the 1996 crime scene sample. Now, the Y chromosome is passed down directly from father to son, meaning it traces the direct paternal lineage.
Okay, so just the men in the family.
Exactly. They ran this specific YSTR profile through a public genetic database owned by the Sorensen Molecular Genealogy Foundation, which had recently been acquired by Ancestry.com.
And they get a hit. They find a 34 out of 35 allele match to a man named Michael Usry Sr.
Right, and a 34 out of 35 match sounds definitive, but it's vital to understand the biological limitations of Y chromosome DNA here. It does not identify a single specific individual.
Wait, it doesn't?
No, it identifies an entire paternal family line. Michael Usry Sr. had donated his DNA years earlier purely for recreational and religious genealogy purposes. He just wanted to map his heritage.
Okay, so he's not the suspect, he's just related to the suspect.
Exactly. Because he shared nearly all of those genetic markers with the suspect's Y chromosome, investigators deduced that the actual killer was a close male relative, likely within 3 or 4 generations on the paternal side.
So the police map out his family tree and locate his son, Michael Usry Jr., who's a filmmaker living in New Orleans. And this is where the coincidence is just staggering. Usry Jr. had actually passed through Idaho Falls back in 1996, right around the time of the murder.
I mean, what are the odds?
I know. Furthermore, he had recently directed a short film containing violent, visceral themes. The investigators look at this and think they've found their guy. I mean, think about the implications of this for a second for anyone listening.
Jerry.
Your father spits in a tube to find out what part of Europe your ancestors are from, and because of that, you become the prime suspect in a brutal, cold case murder across the country.
That's the reality of it. The police obtained a warrant, traveled all the way to New Orleans, interrogated Usry Jr., and swabbed his cheek for a direct 1-to-1 DNA comparison.
No.
The results returned a definitive negative. He was completely cleared. He was not a match to the crime scene evidence. However, the collateral damage to public trust was just immense.
Oh, I bet. The public backlash was deafening.
Right.
People were outraged to learn that law enforcement was trawling through recreational databases without warrants to look at family lines.
Oh.
Ancestry.com ultimately took the entire Sorensen Y chromosome database offline to protect user privacy.
It perfectly illustrated the profound risk of casting a wide genetic net. Targeting a specific suspect with a warrant is entirely different from conducting a dragnet search that inadvertently sweeps up innocent relatives.
Yeah, that's a huge distinction.
The Usry misfire severely damaged the credibility of genetic genealogy, demonstrating how easily consumer databases could be weaponized if the science wasn't applied with absolute precision.
And you'd think the Usry dead end could have been the final nail in the coffin for the Angie Dodge case. But investigators basically just had to wait for the next leap in technology. So fast forward to 2018.
The game changes.
It really does. The Idaho Falls police turn to Parabon Nanolabs and bring in genetic genealogist C.C. Moore, who is essentially the pioneer of using this tech for cold cases. They upload the crime scene profile into a public database called GED Match.
But the challenge they face cannot be overstated here. The DNA sample from 1996 was incredibly degraded.
How bad was it?
Well, when Parabon analyzed the profile, they achieved only a 61.2% call rate.
Wow, that sounds low.
It is. To give that context, consumer DNA tests use fresh saliva to yield millions of intact genetic data points. Forensic evidence that has been sitting around for decades is fragmented. They were missing roughly 329,000 single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs, out of the 850,000 they typically require for a robust genealogical search.
So it's like...
You were basically trying to read a novel where nearly half the words are redacted.
That's a perfect way to describe it. The profile was in such rough shape that C.C. Moore actually passed on the case initially. She didn't believe the data was viable enough to build accurate family trees.
But she changed her mind.
She did, because Angie Dodge's mother, Carol Dodge, refused to let it go. She'd been fighting relentlessly for decades. And incredibly, over those years, Carol Dodge had meticulously reviewed the interrogation tapes herself, realized Christopher Tapp was coerced, and actually began fighting alongside the Innocence Project for his release.
That is just incredible strength.
It is. Carol personally implored C.C. Moore to take another look. Moore takes the case. And despite that massive data gap, she finds matches in GED Match that share between 85 to 95 centimorgans with our unknown killer.
Now, sharing 85 to 95 centimorgans drops you right into the second cousin or half-second cousin range.
Which sounds super distant.
It's a distant relationship, yeah. But in the hands of a skilled genealogist, it is a rock-solid anchor point. Unlike the Y chromosome search from 2014, Moore was utilizing autosomal DNA this time.
Okay, autosomal DNA, what's the difference?
Autosomal DNA provides the full genetic tapestry, both the maternal and paternal lines, allowing her to see every branch of the family tree, not just the surname lineage.
Got it. So Moore builds 3 distinct genetic networks based on those distant cousins. She traces all these different family lines back in time, century by century, until they finally intersect. The genetic rivers converge on one specific ancestral couple born in the late 1800s, Clarence and Cleo Ussery, Ussery.
Which sounds identical to the Ussery family from New Orleans.
Exactly. Here's where it gets really interesting. The 2014 test wasn't completely wrong about the bloodline.
Right.
It just sent investigators down the wrong branch of a massive family tree because surnames change, spellings mutate over generations.
Right, and through exhaustive, painstaking traditional research, combing through obituaries, marriage licenses, dusty library archives, Moore mapped out every living descendant of Clarence and Cleo Ussery. She identified 6 living males who fit the genetic profile.
The police investigate these 6 men. They find one living in Twin Falls, Idaho. They tail him, wait for him to spit out a wad of chewing tobacco in public, collect it, and rush it to the lab.
Yeah.
The results come back, and it's a miss. The DNA is similar, but it's not the killer. At this stage, Moore has officially eliminated every single known branch of the Ussery family tree. It seems impossible.
But this is where the true brilliance of reverse genealogy is deployed. Traditional genealogy traces a person backward to find their ancestors. Reverse genealogy requires building the family tree forward in time, starting from an ancestor and hunting for hidden, undocumented descendants.
Okay, so tracing the children's children's children.
Exactly. Moore went back to Clarence and Cleo Ussery and began digging deeper into the female lines. She uncovered a distant obituary mentioning a daughter who had married into the family. Public records suggested the marriage ended without children. But by cross-referencing obscure records, Moore discovered they did, in fact, have a son.
A secret son.
A 7th, completely unacknowledged descendant.
This is the breakthrough. We always talk about finding a needle in a haystack. But this wasn't just a needle in a haystack. The needle was cleverly disguised as a piece of hay.
That's exactly what it was.
Because this 7th descendant was raised by a stepfather, which meant his surname wasn't Ussery. His name was Brian Leigh Dripps Sr. When investigators pulled his background, they discovered a chilling detail. In 1996, Brian Dripps lived directly across the street from Angie Dodge's apartment.
It is a stunning synthesis of disciplines. You have genomic sequencing parsing fragmented, decades-old DNA, combined with complex algorithmic networking, layered with old-fashioned shoe leather detective work to uncover a ghost hidden in a surname change.
It's unbelievable, but having a name on a genealogical chart is just a theory.
Yeah.
To make an arrest, the police need definitive physical DNA proof.
They need his actual DNA.
Right. It's May 2019. Investigators track Dripps to Caldwell, Idaho. They initiate surveillance, tailing him for hours. Eventually, Dripps tosses a cigarette butt out the window of his vehicle.
And they grab it.
Detectives recover the discarded cigarette, send it to the Idaho State Police Forensic Laboratory, and the results confirm what C.C. Moore suspected. It is a complete, undeniable genetic match to the semen and hair recovered from the crime scene 23 years prior.
Confronted with the inescapable reality of the DNA evidence, Dripps confessed. He admitted he was heavily under the influence of alcohol and cocaine that night. He stated his initial intent was to commit rape, but the assault escalated into murder. In 2021, Dripps was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison.
Which brings us to the profound emotional whiplash at the core of this deep dive. Because Dripps is identified as the true killer, Christopher Tapp is finally, fully exonerated in July of 2019.
Finally.
The Idaho Innocence Project spent years fighting the system to get that false confession thrown out. Tapp lost 2 decades of his life in a concrete box for a crime he didn't commit. Following his release, Tapp sued the city of Idaho Falls. In 2022, he was awarded an $11.7 million settlement. The city's mayor issued a formal public apology and pledged a complete overhaul of their interrogation policies.
Tapp's exoneration sent shockwaves through the state's legal framework. His immense suffering and his relentless advocacy directly forced the state of Idaho to enact new compensation laws for the wrongfully convicted in 2021.
That's a huge legacy.
It is. His case became the definitive argument for mandatory recording of all interrogations. and the eradication of the guilt presumptive tactics that stole his youth. He forced the system to evolve.
But listen to this. You battle the state for decades. You finally clear your name. You secure an $11.7 million settlement to start your life over. You think the nightmare is finally behind you.
Yeah.
But in a tragic, almost incomprehensible twist, Chris Tapp's second chance is violently cut short.
It's just devastating.
In October 2023, at just 47 years old, Tapp dies after suffering severe blunt force trauma during an altercation in a Las Vegas hotel room. The coroner rules his death a homicide. A former professional wrestler named Daniel Rodimer is charged with his murder. It is a devastating, infuriating end for a man who spent his entire adult life fighting to survive the violence of others.
It is a profound tragedy. A life defined by an agonizing, heroic fight for truth ended so senselessly. And as we process the immense human cost of Christopher Tapp's journey, we must also examine the broader societal landscape his case illuminated. The technology that finally vindicated him, investigative genetic genealogy, is now fundamentally reshaping the parameters of privacy and law enforcement.
Yeah, our sources include a fascinating honors project study from Bowling Green State University that tracks this rapid expansion. By the end of 2022, just a few short years after the Golden State Killer and Angie Dodge cases proved the concept, 545 criminal cases had been solved utilizing investigative genetic genealogy.
That's a massive jump.
It is. The study surveys public opinion on this tech, and the results are complex. There is overwhelming public support for using these databases to hunt down violent killers, solve crimes against children, and identify missing persons.
But the data reveals a distinct threshold. The public is highly supportive of catching murderers, but they become deeply uncomfortable when law enforcement utilizes these sprawling genetic networks to investigate nonviolent crimes.
Yeah, I can totally see that.
The core of that discomfort is rooted in the murky ethics of consent. The BGSU study highlights a ubiquitous modern behavior. When participants were asked how frequently they actually read the terms and conditions before clicking agree on websites, the vast majority admitted they never do.
Never. I mean, I look at that statistic and I think about the implications for you, for me, for anyone listening. If millions of people are just blindly clicking agree on consumer DNA websites, aren't we essentially opting ourselves, our parents, and our unborn children into a massive, unregulated global police lineup?
This raises an important question, and it is the exact legal tightrope the courts are walking today. The BGSU study examines the balance between collective security and individual privacy through the lens of a landmark 1988 Supreme Court decision, California v. Greenwood.
What did that ruling do?
That ruling established that individuals have no reasonable expectation of privacy regarding items they discard. Originally, it applied to garbage bags left on a curb. But today, the legal system applies that same logic to microscopic shed cells.
So, shedding DNA.
Right. When Brian Drips tossed that cigarette butt out his window, legally, he abandoned his DNA. Therefore, police do not need a warrant to collect it, sequence it, and use it against you. When you combine the warrantless collection of discarded DNA with the sprawling reach of consumer genetic databases, law enforcement possesses virtually limitless investigative power.
The threads of this story are just incredible.
Yeah.
The 1996 murder of Angie Dodge exposed the fatal, life-destroying flaws of psychological coercion in police interrogations. It stole 20 years from Chris Tapp, an innocent man whose freedom was tragically brief. And ultimately, it showcased the undeniable power of genetic genealogy. It took a microscopic, degraded puzzle piece, and through the sheer force of science, revealed the true picture of what happened that night.
It really did. And as we conclude, I want you to consider a final lingering thought raised by the trajectory of the BGSU study. We traditionally view DNA privacy as a personal choice. You either spit in the tube or you don't.
Right, it's opt-in.
But the reality of autosomal genetic networks dictates that you no longer need to participate to be identified. Eventually, so many distant relatives will have uploaded their profiles to these consumer sites that algorithms will be able to triangulate and identify literally anyone in the country. What does the illusion of genetic anonymity mean for your future when a third cousin you've never even met has already handed over the keys to your DNA?
Man, that is something to seriously think about the next time you drop a coffee cup in a public trash can. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, and we'll catch you next time.